Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this information session about our new policy director position at UnCommon Law. I'm Keith Watley, the executive director at UnCommon Law, and I'm joined by Leah Dawood, who's our policy associate. Let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to accomplish tonight. On the next slide, we've only got 30 minutes or so. We're trying to pack a lot in here. So I'll quickly walk through what we're going to try to cover. The first one you can see is the moment. It's the why we're doing this and why we're doing it now. The role, we're going to describe what this policy director role is, and then next some of the priorities we're already thinking about. And then we will finish by giving you all an opportunity to ask questions about what we've shared. You will have to do that in the comments or chat section here, and we will grab a handful of those, put them up on the screen, and Leah and I will do our best to answer them. We appreciate you joining us. We're jumping right into it because we're trying to cover a lot. So on the next slide, you can see a couple of highlights, takeaways from that very short video. As you can see, the parole board seems to be okay with the status quo. We clearly are not. Some of the highlights that I think form the foundation, the basis for what we're trying to do and why, is the fact that we have now more than half of the people in California's prisons are going to have to face the parole board in order to be released. 55% of people in prison will have their cases reviewed by the board. And that 20% stat is dating back to 1981. California's parole grant rate has never, well, it's only once gone above 20%. That was a couple of years ago, 2018. But for the whole 40-year history, that was the only year that more than 20% of the eligible parole hearings resulted in a parole grant. And you heard the head of the parole board say that she doesn't think things need to change. One of the other points that we try to highlight in our work is that in California, especially, most people who are in prison these days are there for serious or violent crimes, 76%. So we can't really decarcerate. We can't really eliminate what people refer to as mass incarceration if we don't have a solution, a much better solution for people in prison for serious or violent crimes. And another thing that came up in last week's hearing is about early indications that racial bias plays a role in parole decisions in California. Not a surprise to anybody, but when a preliminary study came out a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, the parole board responded by attacking the researcher and refusing to disclose any more information about racial outcomes in parole hearings. And so it's an area they don't want to look at, that they haven't looked at. We think they should. We think they have to. The last point I'll make here, it was discussed in last week's meeting also, is just about the prevalence of traumatic experiences, traumatic histories among people who are incarcerated. Very, very high rates that most people in prison, most people who run the prisons don't think about, don't care about, and there are almost no programs that directly respond to those issues. Those who've heard us at UnCommon Law talk about this stuff, we kind of sound like a broken record, but we really recognize these are things that folks need to know about. And we're here this evening to talk about things we think we can do and should do differently to try to address it. We go to the next slide. The experiences we've had in our parole hearings really tell us a lot about what's missing. They tell us about how the support we provide to people who are going to the parole board is filling a major, major gap in the system, especially when it comes to trauma-informed counseling and programs and effective legal representation. So as you saw, 20% is the statewide parole grant rate. The rate in our office is pretty consistently much higher than that. We're around 60%. But despite that success, we recognize that it's limited. It's limited by the policies that are in place, the ones that you heard the board say are pretty good, and limited by our ability to engage decision makers, lawmakers in Sacramento. And so we just recognize that, especially this year, that we really need a policy ground game to make real change happen for the folks that we serve. And so we'd really love to have someone who has either been incarcerated, been impacted by it, to help contribute to and lead our policy efforts. And so we strongly encourage people who are directly impacted to apply for this policy director position. I'm going to give Leah a chance to talk more about the specific role and what some of our preliminary thoughts are about what our priorities should be from a policy perspective. Leah?
Thanks, Keith. So as Keith mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the role. We're looking for our policy director. UnCommon Law has not had a policy director before. And it's a really exciting time to join our organization because A, we're growing rapidly, and B, with a policy director's help, we're poised to take some of the lessons that we've learned sitting across from clients in prisons and advocating for them in front of the board to the ears of the people who need to hear them the most in Sacramento. So here's a rundown of some of the responsibilities of this role, and you can find the job description on our website. Overall, though, we're looking for someone who is both visionary and adaptable, and who can help us make far-reaching connections with policymakers, other community-based organizations, as well as community advocates across the state, and who can really help us develop and lead our policy strategy framework. Another important piece of this, I think, is going to be helping to lead public education, so making the legislative process more accessible to the people that we serve. And as Keith mentioned, I really want to echo what he said. We're really encouraging formerly incarcerated people with policy experience to apply for this role. We very intentionally didn't set a requirement for the number of years of policy experience that we're looking for, because we recognize that everyone is different. So with that, on the next slide, I'd like to briefly talk about some of our policy priorities. And these are jumping off points that we've started developing this year, but they need a lot of refinement. So we're interested in improving the institutional culture within CDCR to provide people with a healthier environment, as well as the resources that they need to meet the board's expectations. But we're also looking to change those expectations. We're interested in changing the parole board standards so that people who are objectively ready to come home have an opportunity to do so, a meaningful opportunity. We also want to increase judicial oversight over parole denials so that there's more accountability in the system when the board misuses their discretion. And like Keith mentioned, we need to address racial bias in decision-making so that the process is fairer for all parole applicants. And lastly, we want to ensure that parole commissioners have an opportunity to meet with incarcerated people and learn from them outside of the parole boardroom, and to make sure that formerly incarcerated people as well as people from underrepresented groups have a seat at the table. So with this quick background on our ideas for this role, I think we're ready to move into questions.
Yes, as you start to, if you have questions you have for us, you can put them in the comment section. We'll throw them on the screen and share them with other folks. And as we answer them, as you start to do that, I will. I want to make the point that, and this comes up a lot in our work, the point that we're not interested in, committed to, working on just making prisons better prisons. We don't really believe in prison. But we do believe in creating safe pathways home for the people who are there, who are already there, including those who are there for serious and violent crimes. California has 35,000 people who are serving life sentences, and thousands more are going to the Parole Board under this current system. And we want there to be safe pathways for them to come home. So we have the first question of who appoints parole commissioners. The governor appoints parole commissioners, and they're appointed generally to 3-year terms. Most of if you take a look at the history and the biographical information that you can find on the board's website, most of the people who get appointed have some background in law enforcement, either as police chiefs, sheriffs, correctional staff, including wardens, prosecutors, a few other areas are covered. But historically, those are the folks who are often appointed to the board. Not always the case, but too often. Lee, you want to take this one?
Sure. So the question is, are you looking for this policy director to revamp UnCommon law's legislative agenda or continue an already established one? So we've developed a policy framework this year, but it needs a lot of work. And so within that, there is a need for the policy director to take on different aspects of the framework and to develop them and make them their own. So I think there's a lot of room to work within our priorities.
A lot of room. Let's see. What are some of the ways you'll measure your policy director's success? Oh, that's a good question. Good question. I mean, we have. I'm trying to figure out whether to call it an aggressive agenda or not. It kind of depends. We have some long-term and some short-term goals, and we can get into some of those details of what those are. But when we talk in concrete terms, we want to see at least a couple of bills introduced in this upcoming legislative session, and we want to get at least one passed. Now, for a brand new policy effort, we feel like that's a good place to start, especially because it's part of a longer, we've put together basically a 3-year plan that will see much bigger steps taken in future years. But that's kind of where we want to start. Now, this is brand new for us, and we're willing to work with somebody who doesn't have decades of policy experience, but we do need to hit the ground running because the Parole Board is going to keep doing what they do, and that's going to leave a lot of people behind. You have so many thousands of people who are stuck in prison, can't get out during a pandemic, and we would love to see and move some legislation that would take some of the discretion away from the Parole Board and the governor that has allowed them to keep these folks inside. So that means we want to be aggressive. It won't necessarily all be legislation. It may be some other policy changes we'd like to see.
I can read that one out loud. How do you see your approach to trauma-informed legal services incorporated into your policy director's work? Keith, I'm happy to let you jump in there. I think, we incorporate trauma responsive work in all aspects of the work that we do. So it's in how we interact with each other as an organization, how we interact with not just our clients, but all the people who come into contact with us. So, I think there's a lot of room for the policy director to incorporate their own practices into the work as well.
I think that's true. I would add that one reason that we think it's important that people who have been in prison or directly impacted by it apply for this position is because there's such a richness of experience that we think has to influence how these policies are developed. And part of that is when you see someone who has transformed their lives while in prison, it involves, in so many cases, going through the process of understanding how the different traumatic experiences in one's life contributed to those decisions and actions, and to be able to communicate that understanding to policymakers, to legislators and other policymakers is really, really important. And so, as Leah said, it's kind of, this trauma-informed approach is something we take seriously, and you see it in every aspect of our work. Oh, looking at SB 1064 as a jumping off point, what do you see as the greatest challenge for this role? Well, part of what I at the top said, or at least early on, we didn't have much of a ground game, much of a presence, much of an understanding of where the potential roadblocks were that were not terribly vocal. And just for background, if people don't know, 1064 was a bill introduced by Senator Skinner intended to prevent the use of confidential information and other unreliable and uncorroborated information in parole hearings. Parole commissioners typically use information from someone's confidential file to deny them parole. And Senator Skinner wanted to stop that. And it made it through the California Senate and through the Assembly. And then on the last day, Governor Newsom vetoed it. But the only public opposition was from the District Attorneys Association, which said, oh, this will make it harder for us to prosecute crimes that come from prisons, basically. Kind of their standard opposition. But what it appears happened was that there was another effort kind of behind the scenes to influence the governor. And frankly, confuse and just mislead the governor about what the bill really was about and what kind of changes are really necessary. So we don't want that to happen again. We want to make sure that the folks who are making these decisions are as informed as they need to be about what's actually happening in this process. So the changes that are intended to make it more fair will be successful going forward.
Happy to read it. Of those mentioned, are there specific policy issues that are pressing given the problems faced by the incarcerated by COVID? Yeah, I mean, of the priorities that I mentioned, we envision these as all working together. I think obviously the urgent issue that COVID has exposed is that prison conditions are terrible, and we need to really focus on getting people out. Especially the prisons are still overcrowded, and making sure that people are safe. And so I think, that of the priorities that we mentioned, there's a lot of ways that they can work together to make more meaningful pathways for folks out of prison.
And the thing I would add about that is one of the biggest problems is that we are asking the wardens, the prison officials, the governor to do the right thing, to exercise their discretion in a way that lets people out so they can save themselves, basically. And time again, they've demonstrated they're not going to do that. And so it points to a huge problem of the discretionary nature of release decisions, that we have a process that depends on these individual decision makers doing the right thing. And as I often say, we're expecting justice from a system that's not designed to give it. And so we think we need to change the system, because they've proven, if in a pandemic with outbreaks right and left in the institutions, that they are not willing to exercise their discretion in a fair and healthy way, then we've got to take away that discretion or limit it significantly.
So the question is the policy director lobbying, outreaching, et cetera, for state only or federal as well?
Well, at this point, we're focused on California. We do think that some of the changes we can make may have implication for what a larger application might look like. But for now, we've got a lot of work to do in California. California has by far the largest population of people who are subject to this discretionary parole process. We have about 3 times as many people serving life sentences as any other state. And we also have, on paper, what looks like the most progressive parole scheme, where it seems like people should be getting out. I mean, in fact, the statute that governs this process says that parole shall normally be granted. And it said that for all 40 years that you saw the parole grant has not exceeded 20%. For many of those years, the parole grant was 1% or even lower in some years. So California has a long way to go. I think there's a lot that we can teach the rest of the country, but we got to figure out how to do it right.
Are there clients or former clients of yours who want to engage in the policymaking process? Would be great to include them.
Yes, indeed. That's the short answer. I mean, we learn a lot from the folks we've worked with inside, former clients or just others that we've seen inside. We have some of them on our staff now. We are strongly encouraging them to apply for this policy director role, as we have indicated a couple of times. We want to see folks engaged in this process, because we've seen, organizations like Sam Lewis's organization, ARC, and others. It makes a huge difference with policymakers when those coming into their doors in their offices in Sacramento are people who were once condemned to die in prison, transform their lives, and are here to show them what's possible, and are leading a whole bunch of other people behind them in the same direction. That's powerful. It's compelling. And we certainly value that as well.
How do you see this role collaborating with the legal team and direct services advocates within the organization?
Well, this 3-year strategy that I referred to earlier, I'm not going into a lot of details tonight, but it encompasses some of the efforts from the legal team. We're going to be building that up further. It seems like all of our teams are building right now, are growing right now. But there's going to be a need for some litigation. We will continue to represent people in their hearings. That's certainly what we do. But in addition to that, we're going to have to challenge some problematic and policies of the Parole Board and perhaps other aspects of the Department of Corrections as a part of a well-coordinated plan that encompasses both litigation and sort of direct policy advocacy and communications to help tell these stories in a way that counters the narrative you just saw in that video, that everything is fine. We know that's not the case. What is your process for someone who wants to apply? Leah, how do they apply?
You can visit our website. So our hiring portal is Bamboo HR. But if you go to, I want to say it's UnCommon Law / join our team, you can find a link for how to apply there.
Yeah, if you just go to uncommonlaw.org, you'll see there's a tab for join our team. You'll see we have several positions that we are looking to fill, but this one is going to be front and center there. And there it is on your screen now. How about that? Pretty good, Leah. You got the whole backslash and everything.
I try.
So not seeing any other questions right now. You can reach out if you have other questions. Looks like I'm seeing from Paul Bocanegra. Love this conversation because I'm a violent offender who is being rejected by current reforms and policies and legislations. I don't think you're a violent offender, Paul. I understand what you're saying, though. Maybe you did something that was serious or violent. That's not who you are. And another reason that we're doing this is because we see that too many of the so-called reforms in recent years have been really clear in saying that they're not willing to include people who have been convicted of serious and violent crimes. And we don't believe in that. So thanks for joining us. You can, as you can see, you can learn more about the position at this website. The link is there. You can also email us through the website. This is the first time we've done one of these informational sessions. Maybe your feedback will tell us whether we'll do it again. It seems like a good way to get some information about what we do in the position. We'll see if we can put it together for future positions. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Leah, for your help. And we hope to see your applications if you're interested. Thanks, everybody. Bye.